How do you follow Christ? Simple question. And actually, there's a kind of a simple answer. You just do what he does, do what he says, and operate in him. Well, why do that? Well, God says to do it. See, God has a plan for a wonderful life for everyone who follows Christ. And Christ, in what he said and what he does, begins to bring that plan to us. You see, there are physical laws and there are spiritual laws, and God's plan is consistent with spiritual law. And spiritual law works because the more you do it, do life the way God says, the better life you're going to have. Not a perfect life, because we're living in a sinful world with a whole bunch of sinners, so, it ain't going to be easy. But if you follow Christ, if you do what he says and do what he does, then there's a possibility for a wonderful life. Okay, and that's a good thing that God has for us. And that life is explained in Scripture, in the New Testament. See, there are physical laws, and if you obey the physical laws, you get to go to the moon, you get to have a refrigerator and a dishwasher, you get to have a car and a house to live in and stuff. And that happens, you get to fly. If you obey the physical laws, you get to fly. Orville and Wilbur obeyed and discovered and obeyed physical law, and they got to fly. And it's the same with spiritual law. And as you obey the spiritual laws, and the Bible explains what they are, Christ lived them and did them, and the epistles, the letters written by the apostles to the church, explain more of how to do that. And that's what the church is about, explaining to the people what the truths of Scripture are. But wait a minute. Those churches don't all agree. There's a church over here that believes in one thing, and a church here that believes in another, and a church here they all, while there are similarities, they're all dealing with the same book, they're teaching a lot of different details. So how do you know which church is the one God goes to? Well, first of all, I drew a conclusion about that. And after my 50 years of study, or during my 50 years of study, I concluded that any church that teaches the biblical Christ, that has the Bible as its principal book, and interprets the Bible like they interpret any document, well, that church is operating under God's authority. And I have concluded that because of what it says in Matthew 6 and Matthew 8 about binding and loosing. Christ said, and speaking about the church, he said, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And he was speaking of the church. The church has God's authority. And which churches are that? Well, those that teach the biblical Christ, that have the Bible as their book, and they interpret the Bible the way they interpret any document. That means you can go to any church like that and be on safe ground. Well, the churches tend not to teach that, but I think that's what Scripture says. Oh, by the way, God has a plan for your success, and we're here to help you work it.